If you enjoy stories about resilience and finding light in the darkness, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It helps us bring more of these narratives to life. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the shadows slicker. Mark stood by the window of his third-floor apartment, watching the water streak against the glass, distorting the city lights into blurry smears of neon and gray. At 38, Mark possessed the kind of stillness that made other people nervous. It was a byproduct of 15 years in the Navy SEALs, a career that had taught him how to be invisible, how to be lethal, and unfortunately, how to shut off the human part of his brain when the noise got too loud. He had been out for 2 years. Civilians called it retirement. Mark called it the waiting room. He spent his days in a routine so rigid it could have been cut from steel. Gym at 400, run at 500, breakfast, reading, silence. He avoided crowds. He avoided sudden noises. And most specifically, he avoided emotional entanglements. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, vibrating against the granite like an angry hornet. Mark ignored it. He knew who it was. Jerry. Jerry was the only tether Mark had left to the normal world. A former logistics officer who had transitioned seamlessly into corporate sales, Jerry made it his personal mission to rehabilitate Mark. The phone stopped, then buzzed again. Mark sighed, the sound deep and ragged in his chest, and picked it up. "You're not going to flake on me, Mark." Jerry's voice boomed before Mark could even say hello. "I booked the table. Chez Andre. 7 o'clock. Do not make me come over there and drag you out." "I didn't agree to this," Mark said, his voice gravelly from disuse. "I told you, I'm not in the market for whatever this is." "It's just dinner, man. You have to eat," Jerry insisted. "Look, her name is Elena. She's smart, she's sharp, and honestly, she's probably too good for a grumpy hermit like you. But I told her you were a decent guy. Don't make a liar out of me." Mark rubbed the back of his neck, where a phantom tension headache always resided. "Jerry, I don't do blind dates. I don't do dates, period. I have nothing to talk about." "What am I supposed to say? Hey, sorry about the 1,000-yard stare?" "She's a runner, Mark." Jerry dropped the hook. "Like, serious athlete. Marathons, triathlons, the works. You guys can talk about cardio zones and shin splints or whatever you adrenaline junkies talk about. Just 1 hour. If you hate it, you leave. Please." Mark looked back at the rain. The solitude of the apartment, usually his shield, suddenly felt like a cage. A runner, someone disciplined, someone who understood physical pain and endurance. Maybe it wouldn't be a total disaster. "Fine," Mark grunted. 1 hour. "But if she asks about the scars, I'm walking out." "She won't. She's cool. Wear the blue shirt. 7 o'clock. The line went dead. Mark stared at the phone. He felt a knot in his stomach, the same specific nausea he used to feel before a drop. He didn't know it yet. But the mission he was walking into would require more courage than any operation he had ever led. Chapter 2. The Deception. Chez Andre was the kind of place Mark hated on principle. It was too loud, too crowded, and the lighting was designed to make everyone look mysterious, which to Mark just meant hard to assess for threats. He arrived at 6:55 p.m. Punctuality was not a habit, it was a cellular structure. He wore the blue button-down shirt, tucked in, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked like twisted rope. He scanned the room, looking for a woman who looked like a runner, athletic build, restless energy, maybe glancing at a smartwatch. The host, a thin man with a pretentious mustache, looked down at his reservation tablet. "Reservation for Jerry?" "Mark, but Jerry made it." "Ah, yes, table 4. Your party is already waiting." Mark followed the host through the maze of tables. His eyes scanned the perimeter, checking exits instinctively. As they approached table 4, nestled in a semi-private alcove near the back, Mark's steps faltered. There was a woman at the table. She was striking, with dark hair cascading over her shoulders and eyes that held a piercing intelligence. She was wearing an elegant emerald dress that highlighted her pale skin. But she wasn't checking a smartwatch. She wasn't tapping her foot with restless runner's energy. She was sitting in a motorized wheelchair, a sleek, high-tech piece of machinery, but a wheelchair nonetheless. Mark froze. The information Jerry had given him, "She's a runner," crashed into the reality before him. It was a lie, or a cruel joke. Jerry had tricked him. He had set Mark up with a disabled woman, knowing Mark would feel too guilty to back out, forcing him into a situation where he had to be the nice guy. Anger, hot and white, flared in Mark's chest. It wasn't about her disability. It was about the ambush. He hated surprises. Surprises got people hurt. He felt the urge to turn around and walk out the door, to call Jerry and tear him apart. But then Elena looked up. Her eyes didn't hold the soft, pleading look Mark expected. They were sharp, analytical. She scanned him from his boots to his haircut in a single second, reading him just as he was reading her. She didn't smile immediately. She just watched him. "You must be Mark," she said. Her voice was calm, melodic, but with a steel core. "And you look like you're contemplating a tactical retreat." Mark blinked. He had been caught. He exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders to drop an inch. He couldn't leave now. That would be cowardice. And whatever Mark was, he wasn't a coward. He stepped forward, his movements stiff. "I'm Mark, and I wasn't retreating, just assessing the terrain." "Please," she gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit down before you block the fire exit." "I'm Elena." Mark sat. The chair felt too small. The table felt too close. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Jerry told me you were a runner." It was a blunt opening, devoid of social grace, but Mark had no energy for small talk. Elena's lips quirked into a half-smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was ironic. "Jerry has a very specific sense of humor. Technically, I was a runner, a very good one. Now I roll. Jerry probably thought if he told you the truth, you wouldn't come." "He was right," Mark said, brutal honesty slipping out. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't look offended. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Good. I like honesty. It saves time. I didn't want to come either. I was told you were an accountant who loves bird-watching." Mark actually snorted. A short, sharp sound. "Accountant. Right. So," Elena said, picking up her menu, "we have two choices. We can eat quickly, endure 45 minutes of awkward silence, and go home to yell at Jerry. Or, we can order the most expensive wine on the list, charge it to Jerry's card, and pretend we're actually enjoying this disaster." Mark looked at her. For the first time all day, the knot in his stomach loosened slightly. She wasn't fragile. "I don't drink wine," Mark said, "but I'll take a steak. Rare." The appetizers had arrived, something small and artistic that Mark considered a waste of a plate. The tension was still there, a thick wire running between them, but it had shifted. It wasn't hostility anymore. It was curiosity. "So," Elena said, maneuvering her fork with precise, elegant movements, "you're not an accountant. The haircut screams military. Army? Navy," Mark corrected. "Retired. Recently? 2 years. And you haven't adjusted yet," she stated, not as a question. Mark looked up sharply. "What makes you say that? You're sitting with your back to the wall. You've scanned the room 3 times since we sat down, and you haven't looked at the menu. You're looking at the people." Elena took a sip of water. "Hypervigilance. My brother was a cop. I know the look." Mark felt a flicker of irritation. He didn't like being read. "It's a habit, hard to break." "I know about habits," Elena said, her eyes drifting momentarily to her legs, hidden beneath the table, before snapping back to his face. "Your world changes, but your brain keeps running the old software." Before Mark could respond, a waiter arrived with the main course. He was young, nervous, and clearly flustered by the presence of the wheelchair at a table usually reserved for intimate dining. As he placed Mark's steak down, he turned to Elena. "And for the lady," the waiter stammered. He placed the pasta dish down, but instead of stepping back, he leaned in, his voice taking on that condescending, overly loud tone people often use with the disabled. "Do you need me to cut that up for you, miss? Is there anything special you need?" The silence at the table was instant and absolute. Mark stopped chewing. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. The condescension in the waiter's voice triggered something primal in him. It was a lack of respect. It was a predator, or in this case, a fool, preying on what they perceived as weakness. Mark set his fork down. The clink against the china sounded like a gunshot. He turned his head slowly toward the waiter. His eyes, usually cold, were now burning. "She ordered pasta," Mark said, his voice low, vibrating with a dangerous frequency. "It doesn't need cutting, and she has working hands. Why don't you step back before you embarrass yourself further?" The waiter froze, his face draining of color as he looked into Mark's face. He saw the violence restrained behind the calm facade. I just meant," the waiter stuttered. "Walk away," Mark commanded. The waiter scrambled back, muttering apologies, and practically ran to the kitchen. Mark turned back to the table, his heart rate elevated, expecting Elena to be embarrassed or horrified by his aggression. This was why he didn't date. He was too intense. He was a wolf at a tea party. But Elena wasn't horrified. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear. It was assessment. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I deal with idiots like him 5 times a day. I can handle myself." "I know," Mark said, picking up his fork again, though his appetite was gone. "But I don't like bullies, and I don't like stupidity." Elena stayed silent for a long moment. Then she reached across the table. Her hand, cool and soft, touched his clenched fist resting on the tablecloth. "Thank you," she said. It wasn't a polite thank you. It was sincere. Most men would have been embarrassed by the wheelchair, or they would have overcompensated and tried to save me to make themselves look like heroes. You didn't do that. You just established a perimeter. Mark looked at her hand on his. He didn't pull away. "You're not a victim, Elena. I can see that." "No," she said, withdrawing her hand. "I'm not. But tell me, Mark, if you're not an accountant and you're clearly not a social butterfly, what did you do in the Navy? And don't give me the cook line." Mark hesitated. He never talked about the teams, not with civilians. They wouldn't understand the darkness. But looking at Elena, seeing the unspoken battles in her own eyes, he felt the strangest sensation, the urge to speak. "I was a SEAL," he said. "Operator. 12 deployments." Elena nodded slowly, as if a puzzle piece had just clicked into place. "That explains the silence," she murmured. "And the sadness." "I'm not sad," Mark defended automatically. "You are," she countered gently. "You're carrying a heavy load, Mark. I know what heavy loads look like. I carry one every time I wake up." The connection was struck. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was the recognition of one survivor by another. The trick of the blind date was fading. This was becoming something real. But Mark had no idea that the real test wasn't the date. It was what Elena was holding back. She wasn't just a former runner. There was a story behind the chair. A story that would collide with his own past in a way neither of them could predict. As they ate, the storm outside intensified, thunder rattling the windows. Mark flinched just a fraction of an inch, his hand tightening on the knife. Elena saw it. She didn't look away. "It's okay," she said softly. "It's just thunder. You're here. You're safe." Mark looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in 2 years, he believed it. But the night was far from over. The storm had turned Seattle into a blurred watercolor painting of charcoal and electric blue. Outside Chez Andre, the wind whipped the rain into horizontal sheets. The valet, huddled under a large umbrella, looked miserable. "My van is around the corner," Elena said, adjusting her scarf. "It's the black Sprinter with the lift." Mark looked at the deluge, then at her. "I'm driving you." Elena raised an eyebrow, the challenge returning to her eyes. "I have hand controls, Mark. I've driven across the country alone. I can handle a little rain." "It's not the rain," Mark said, his voice dropping an octave, cutting through the sound of the wind. "It's the other drivers. People drive like idiots in this weather. You're in a modified vehicle. If you get hit, it's a problem. Let me drive, please." It was the please that did it. It wasn't a demand. It was a request from a man who clearly needed to feel useful. Elena hesitated, then sighed, fishing a key fob from her purse. "Fine, but if you scratch it, you owe me a new paint job. And don't adjust the mirrors. It took me 3 weeks to get them perfect." Mark took the keys. His hand brushed hers, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of static through him. Or maybe that was just the storm. Getting Elena into the van was a process of mechanical ballet. The side door slid open with a whir, a ramp descending like a drawbridge. Mark stood in the rain, soaking wet within seconds, watching as she expertly maneuvered her chair up the ramp and into the locking dock behind the passenger seat. He didn't offer to push. He knew better now. He just stood guard, a silent sentinel ensuring the world stayed back while she secured herself. Once inside, the silence of the van was heavy. Mark sat in the driver's seat. It felt strange. The hand controls were mounted on the steering column, alien technology to him. He ignored them, using the standard pedals, his large frame filling the space. "Turn left on Mercer," Elena directed from the back. As he pulled out into traffic, Mark felt a strange sense of calm. The chaos of the restaurant was gone. Here, in the dark cocoon of the vehicle, with the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the wipers, the world made sense again. He was the operator. She was the VIP. It was a dynamic he understood. "You drive like a grandpa," Elena commented after 5 minutes of silence. Mark glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw her silhouette, lit intermittently by passing street lamps. "I drive like I want to arrive alive. Speed is for people who haven't seen what happens when physics wins." "Touché," she murmured. "So, the SEALs. Did you enjoy it? Or was it just a job?" Mark gripped the wheel tighter. It wasn't a job. It was an identity. You don't enjoy it. You survive it. You do it because you can, and because most people can't. And now? Now I'm just Mark, and I'm trying to figure out if that's enough. The honesty hung in the air. Elena didn't respond immediately. She just watched the city roll by, her reflection ghostly in the window. "Turn right here," she whispered eventually. "Welcome to the fortress." They pulled up to a renovated industrial building in the Capitol Hill district. It was brick, solid, and accessible. Mark parked the van and killed the engine. The silence returned, louder than before. "I'll walk you up," Mark said. It wasn't a question. "I expected nothing less," Elena replied. Elena's apartment was a revelation. It was a spacious loft with polished concrete floors and wide open lanes between furniture, designed for wheels, not feet. But it wasn't clinical. It was warm, filled with books, abstract art, and plants that cascaded from high shelves. Mark stood in the entryway, dripping water onto the mat, feeling like a rough beast intruding on a sanctuary. "Towels are in the basket by the door," Elena said, rolling past him toward the kitchen. "Make yourself at home. I'm making tea." "Do you drink tea? Or is that too civilized for a warrior?" "Tea is fine," Mark said, drying his face with a plush white towel. He wandered deeper into the room while she busied herself with a kettle. The kitchen was lowered, everything within arm's reach for her. It was a marvel of adaptation, but Mark's eyes were drawn to the far wall, where a long shelf displayed a timeline of a life interrupted. There were photos, lots of them. Elena standing on a podium, a gold medal around her neck. Elena running through a finish line, arms raised, face contorted in triumphant exhaustion. Elena hiking a ridge in Patagonia, looking strong, vibrant, unstoppable. And then the photos stopped. The last photo was dated 4 years ago. After that, the shelf held different things: ceramic art, small sculptures, things made with hands rather than legs. Mark stared at a picture of her in running gear. The definition in her legs was incredible. She looked like a Greek statue brought to life. He looked from the photo to the woman in the kitchen, hearing the soft hum of her chair. The contrast was a physical blow to his gut. "I was fast." Elena's voice came from behind him. Mark turned. She was holding 2 mugs, balancing them on a tray attached to her armrest. "You were incredible," Mark corrected. "I know that look. That's the look of someone who pushes past the red line." "Marathon runner," she said, handing him a mug. "I was training for the Olympic trials. I ran 70 miles a week. I knew every crack in the pavement of this city." She maneuvered her chair to face the large window that looked out over the rainy skyline. "Now I know every curb cut and every elevator that doesn't work." Mark sat on a leather sofa, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. The tea was hot, grounding him. "What happened, Elena, if you don't mind me asking?" It was the question that had been hovering since the restaurant. The elephant in the room. Elena took a sip of her tea, her gaze distant. "I don't mind." It's not a secret. It's just a fact, like the weather. She spun her chair around to face him. Her expression was unreadable, masked by a calm acceptance that Mark found terrifyingly strong. 3 years ago, November, a night just like this. Rain, wind, bad visibility. Mark set his mug down. He gave her his full attention, the same intensity he used to give a mission briefing. "I was running," Elena began, her voice steady, rhythmic, as if she were reciting a script she had memorized to keep the pain at bay. "I shouldn't have been. It was late, dark, and slippery. But I had had a fight with my boyfriend at the time, and running was my therapy. It was how I processed anger." She looked at her hands, tracing the rim of the mug. "I was on a shoulder of the road up near Tiger Mountain. I was wearing my reflective vest. I had my headlamp. I did everything right. But you can't control the variables, Mark. You know that." "The X factor," Mark murmured. "The thing you don't see." "Exactly." He came around the curve doing at least 60. A black SUV. I saw the headlights sweep across the trees, blindingly bright. I remember thinking, he's going too wide. Mark could visualize it. The wet asphalt, the glare of the lights, the split-second realization that the geometry of the situation meant death. "I tried to jump toward the ditch," Elena continued, "but the mud was slick. I slipped, and then impact." She paused. The room was so quiet Mark could hear the hum of the refrigerator. "I didn't feel pain at first. Just physics. The force of it. I was thrown 30 feet. I landed in the brush. I remember looking up at the rain falling into my eyes, and I tried to get up. My brain said, 'Stand up.' My legs said, 'Nothing. Just silence.' It was the loudest silence I've ever heard." Mark's jaw was clenched so hard his teeth ached. He knew about trauma. He knew about the moment the body breaks. But hearing it from her, seeing the life she had lost, enraged him. "Did he stop?" Mark asked, though he already suspected the answer. Elena let out a short, bitter laugh. "Stop?" "No." He paused. "I saw the brake lights flare red, casting this demonic glow on the wet road. I thought he was coming to help. But then, the engine roared and he sped off. He left me there in the mud, in the freezing rain, unable to move. A coward." Mark spat the word out like a curse. "A criminal," Elena corrected. "I lay there for 6 hours, Mark. Hypothermia set in. If a trucker hadn't stopped to check his tires at dawn and seen the reflection of my vest, I would have died." She looked at Mark. Her eyes weren't wet. They were dry and hard as diamonds. T11 and T12 vertebrae crushed. Spinal cord severed. Complete paraplegia. The doctors told me I'd never walk again before I even warmed up from the hypothermia. Mark felt a surge of protective instinct so violent it almost made him dizzy. He wanted to find this driver. He wanted to hunt him down with the skills the government had spent millions teaching him. "Did they catch him?" Mark asked. Elena shook her head. "No witnesses, no CCTV cameras on that stretch of road. The police found some paint chips, black metallic, common. They looked for damaged SUVs in body shops for a few months, but nothing. It's a cold case. A file in a dusty box. That's unacceptable," Mark growled, standing up and pacing the small area of the living room. "Someone knows. Someone always knows." "It's over, Mark," Elena said softly. "I spent a year being angry. I spent a year hating the world, hating my legs, hating the rain. But hate is heavy. It's too heavy to carry in a wheelchair. So, I let it go. I focused on what I can do, not what I can't." Mark stopped pacing and looked at her. He admired her. More than that. He was in awe of her. She was stronger than half the men he had served with. "You're amazing," he said. "I'm surviving," she replied. "Just like you." The confession had shifted the energy in the room again. They weren't strangers on a blind date anymore. They were two soldiers comparing wounds in a foxhole. Mark sat back down, closer this time. "I didn't get hit by a car," Mark said, his voice rough. "But I know about the silence, the moment when everything changes." Elena waited. She didn't push. She offered him the same space he had offered her. "My last op," Mark began, staring at the floor. We were in a valley. Bad intel. We walked into a complex ambush. RPGs, machine gun fire from 3 sides. It was chaos. He rubbed his face with his hands, the memories flashing like strobe lights. My teammate, Jason, he was right next to me. 1 second he was joking about his daughter's birthday party. The next, he was gone. Mist. Pink mist. Elena flinched, but she didn't look away. I took a round to the shoulder and shrapnel in the leg. Mark continued. But I didn't feel it. I dragged what was left of Jason to cover. I held the perimeter for 4 hours until the medevac could land. I kept talking to him, even though I knew he was dead. I promised him I'd get him home. He looked up at Elena, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. The first time he had shown this emotion in years. I got him home, but I didn't come back. Not really. The Mark who left for that deployment. He died in that valley too. The guy sitting here. He's just the shell that walked away. Elena reached out. This time, she took his hand in both of hers. Her grip was strong. You're not a shell, Mark, she whispered. You're still here. You're in pain. That means you're alive. Dead things don't hurt. I feel guilty. Mark admitted, the words tasting like ash. Every day. Why am I here? Why can I walk? Why can I run? Why am I eating steak in a nice restaurant while Jason is in the ground and you? He gestured to her chair. It's not fair. Fair is a fairy tale for children, Elena said sharply. The world isn't fair. It's chaotic and brutal. But it's also beautiful. You're here because you survived. I'm here because I survived. We don't honor the dead or the lost by suffering, Mark. We honor them by living, by using the time they didn't get. She squeezed his hand. You have legs, strong legs. Run for me. Don't sit in your apartment staring at the rain. Run. Use what you have. That's how you make peace with the guilt. Mark looked at their joined hands. Her words cut through the fog of his depression like a laser. Run for me. I haven't run in months, Mark confessed. I go to the gym, but I don't run. It reminds me of the escape, of running away from the ambush. Then change the narrative, Elena said. Run toward something. Run because you can. The moment stretched, intimate and profound. The air was charged with a connection that went beyond physical attraction. It was a spiritual resonance. Suddenly, Elena pulled her hand back, her expression shifting. A thought seemed to strike her, a hesitation. Mark, she said, her voice changing tone. It was lower, more tentative. There's something else. Something I didn't tell you about the accident. Mark sat up straighter, sensing the shift. What is it? Elena looked at the window, then back at him. She looked conflicted, as if debating whether to burden him with more information. You asked if they caught the guy. I told you no. That's true. The police didn't. But, Mark pressed. But, I remember something I didn't tell the police. Because at the time, I thought I was hallucinating from the pain and the drugs. I thought it was a nightmare. What did you see? Mark's operator mode engaged instantly. His focus narrowed to a pinprick. The SUV, Elena whispered. When it stopped, before it sped away, the back window was broken, just a little, replaced with tape and plastic, and there was a sticker on the bumper. It was distinctive. Not a political sticker or a sports team. What was it? It was a unit insignia, Elena said, looking directly into Mark's eyes. A trident, a gold trident on a blue background, with a crack running through it. Mark's blood ran cold. The room seemed to tilt. A Navy SEAL trident? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, Elena said. I didn't tell the cops because, well, who would believe a delirious girl in the rain? And I didn't want to believe a hero could leave me to die. Mark stood up slowly. A trident, but not just any trident. A trident with a crack running through it. He knew that symbol. It wasn't standard issue. It was a custom decal. A specific unit inside the teams used it as an unofficial morale patch. A joke about being broken but sharp. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew who drove a black SUV. He knew who had that sticker. Elena, Mark said, his voice trembling with a rage he could barely contain. Describe the SUV again. Was it a Chevy Tahoe, lifted, with a winch on the front? Elena's eyes widened, Yes, exactly. How did you know? Mark didn't answer. He turned away, walking to the window, staring out at the Seattle rain that hid so many sins. He knew the driver. It wasn't a stranger. It was Jerry, the man who had set up the date, his friend, the man who had pushed him to come here tonight. Why? Why would Jerry set him up with the woman he had paralyzed? Was it guilt? Was it a sick game? Or did Jerry not even realize who Elena was? Mark's hands balled into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. The revelation threatened to shatter the fragile peace he had just found. "Mark?" Elena called out, sensing the shift in his energy. "What is it? You're scaring me." Mark turned back to her. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were filled with a terrible resolve. "I know who did this to you," he said. The silence in Elena's apartment was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. The rain continued to hammer against the glass, but inside, the atmosphere had turned brittle, like dry leaves ready to catch fire. "Jerry," Elena whispered, testing the name on her tongue. It tasted like poison. "Your friend Jerry?" Mark was pacing again. His movements were no longer the stiff, restrained motions of a man trying to be polite. He was moving with the predatory fluidity of a tiger in a cage. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing through 15 years of friendship. "We served together in Coronado," Mark said, his voice low and raspy. He wasn't a SEAL, he was logistics. But he worked closely with the teams. He idolized the operators. He bought that SUV 3 years ago. He was so proud of it. He put that custom sticker on the bumper, the broken trident. It was an inside joke for guys who got banged up in training but kept going. Elena spun her chair around to follow him. But why? If he hit me? If he left me there? Why would he introduce us? It's psychotic, Mark. It doesn't make sense. Guilt. Mark stopped and looked at her. Guilt makes people do irrational things. Maybe he didn't know it was you, not specifically. He hit a runner. He fled. He's been living with that secret for 3 years. Then he meets you, maybe through his consulting firm, maybe at a charity event. And he sees the chair. He learns you were a runner. He's my financial advisor, Elena realized, her eyes widening. He took over my portfolio 2 years ago. He sought me out. He's trying to pay a debt, Mark deduced, his face hardening into a mask of disgust. He can't give you your legs back. He can't confess without going to prison. So he tries to fix your life in other ways. He manages your money. And then he sees me, his broken friend. And he thinks, if I put them together, maybe they can save each other. It's his twisted way of seeking redemption. Elena felt a wave of nausea. He's playing God with our lives to make himself feel better about almost killing me. He's not playing God, Mark said, walking to the door where his coat hung. He's playing with fire, and he just got burned. Where are you going? Elena asked, her voice sharp. I need eyes on the target, Mark said, slipping into military vernacular. I need to see the car. I need to be 100% sure before we make a move. If I'm wrong, I ruin a friendship. If I'm right, he didn't finish the sentence. I'm coming with you, Elena stated. No, Mark shook his head. It's raining. It's late. And if he sees you, he'll know the jig is up. He'll panic. Men like Jerry, when they panic, they get dangerous. They lawyer up, they destroy evidence. I need to get in, confirm the intel, and get out without him knowing I was there. Elena looked at him. She saw the soldier. She saw the protector. For 3 years, she had fought every battle alone. Trusting someone else to fight for her was terrifying. But looking at Mark, she realized she wasn't just trusting a man. She was trusting a weapon she had accidentally armed. Take pictures, she said simply. High resolution. Mark nodded. I'll be back in an hour. Lock the door. Jerry lived in Bellevue, in a sprawling house with a 3-car garage and a manicured lawn that cost more to maintain than Mark's annual pension. It was a 20-minute drive from Capitol Hill. Mark drove the van differently this time. He wasn't gentle. He drove with calculated aggression, cutting through the rain-slicked streets. His mind was a tactical map. He knew Jerry's security system. He had helped him install it a year ago. A simple keypad code on the side gate. 1984. Jerry wasn't creative. He parked the van 2 blocks away, under the canopy of a large oak tree. He pulled a black beanie from his pocket, pulled it low, and stepped out into the storm. The cold rain felt good. It numbed the emotional turmoil and sharpened his senses. He moved through the shadows of the suburban neighborhood. He avoided streetlights. He watched for motion sensor floodlights. This was the skill set the taxpayers had funded, the ability to be a ghost. He reached Jerry's property line. The house was dark, except for the flickering blue light of a television in the upstairs master bedroom. Jerry was awake. Mark vaulted the side fence with silent grace, landing in the wet grass without a sound. He moved to the detached garage. It had windows along the top, too high to look through, but there was a side door. Locked. Mark knelt. He didn't have lockpicks, but he had a tension tool made from a stiff piece of wire he kept in his wallet. Old habits died hard. He worked the lock. Click. He slipped inside and closed the door softly. The garage smelled of motor oil, expensive wax, and cedar. It was a shrine to Jerry's toys. There was a vintage Porsche under a tarp, a set of golf clubs, and there, in the main bay, was the black Chevy Tahoe. Mark didn't turn on the lights. He pulled a small tactical flashlight from his pocket, shielding the lens with his fingers to allow only a sliver of light to escape. He approached the beast. It was massive, black paint, chrome trim. It looked pristine. Mark walked to the rear. His heart pounded in his ears, a slow, heavy drumbeat. He shone the light on the bumper. There it was, the sticker, the broken trident. It was faded now, weathered by 3 years of rain and sun, but unmistakable. The gold trident on the blue field, with the jagged crack running down the center. Mark crouched low. He ran his fingers over the bumper. To the untrained eye, it was perfect, but Mark knew what to look for. He felt the texture of the paint. On the left corner, near the sticker, the paint was slightly thicker. Orange peel texture. It was a respray. He moved underneath the car, lying on the cold concrete. He shone the light up into the chassis. He saw it. The mounting bracket for the bumper was new. The bolts were shiny, not rusted like the rest of the undercarriage. And there, tucked up inside the wheel well, was a small fragment of plastic that hadn't been cleared away during the repair. A shard of a taillight housing. Jerry had fixed it. Probably in this very garage, or at a shady shop where they didn't ask questions. Mark slid out from under the car. He stood up, staring at the vehicle. It wasn't just a car. It was a weapon. It was the thing that had taken Elena's legs. And it was sitting here, polished and cherished, while Elena struggled to reach the top shelf in her kitchen. He took out his phone. He photographed the sticker. He photographed the mismatched paint texture. He photographed the VIN number. He had the proof. As he turned to leave, the garage door opener light flickered on. The automatic motor hummed. The main garage door was opening. Jerry was coming in. Mark had 3 seconds. The large bay door was rolling up slowly. Headlights from the Porsche in the driveway, Jerry's wife must have been out, cut through the opening gap, slicing across the floor. Mark couldn't go out the side door. The sensor would chime in the house. He couldn't hide under the Tahoe. Too obvious. He scanned the room. In the corner there was a stack of storage crates covered by a heavy canvas drop cloth. Mark dove. He rolled behind the crates and pulled the drop cloth over his head just as the Porsche's engine roared into the garage. The car pulled in. The engine cut. The garage door began to close, sealing them in darkness again. Mark held his breath. He controlled his heart rate, forcing it down through sheer will. Biofeedback. He became a stone. He heard the car door open, high heels clicking on the concrete. Not Jerry. It was Linda, Jerry's wife. "Jerry?" she called out, her voice echoing. "Did you leave the side door unlocked? The light is blinking." Mark froze. He had picked the lock, but the sensor light on the wall panel must have triggered. The door from the house opened. Jerry stepped into the garage. "I checked it, honey." Jerry's voice. He sounded tired. "It's just the sensor acting up. I need to change the battery." "You spend more time in this garage than with your kids," Linda complained, the heels clicking toward the house door. "Are you coming to bed?" "In a minute," Jerry said. "I just want to check something." Linda sighed and went inside, closing the door. Mark was alone with Jerry. He could see Jerry's silhouette through a gap in the canvas. Jerry walked over to the Tahoe. He didn't get in. He just stood there, staring at the front bumper. He reached out and touched it, a strange, tender gesture. Then, he leaned his forehead against the cold metal of the hood. "I'm sorry," Jerry whispered into the darkness. "I'm so sorry." Mark watched. It wasn't the voice of a monster. It was the voice of a man being eaten alive from the inside out. But pity didn't wash away the crime. Jerry stood there for another minute, a statue of regret, before turning and walking back into the house. The lock clicked. The lights went out. Mark waited 10 full minutes. Then he slipped out the side door, relocked it with the tension tool, and vanished into the rain. Chapter 11. The War Council. When Mark returned to the loft, Elena was waiting exactly where he had left her. She hadn't moved. She hadn't turned on the TV. She was staring at the rain. Mark didn't say a word. He walked over to her and handed her his phone. Elena took it. Her hands were trembling slightly. She swiped through the photos. The sticker, the paint, the VIN. She stopped on the photo of the sticker. She stared at it for a long time. Then she closed her eyes and let the phone drop into her lap. She didn't cry. She just exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to expel 3 years of wondering. "It's real," she whispered. "It's him," Mark confirmed. "And he knows it. I saw him. He was in the garage. He was apologizing to the car." "He apologized to the car?" Elena looked up, incredulity mixing with rage. "He apologizes to the metal, but he leaves the human being in the mud? He's a coward, Elena." "Cowards hide from the truth because they can't handle the reflection in the mirror." Mark sat on the coffee table, facing her. He was close enough to touch her knees. "So, the question is, what do you want to do? We have the evidence. We can go to the police right now. They can match the paint, the repairs. He'll go to jail, probably for a few years. Hit and run, causing bodily injury. He'll lose his job, his house, his reputation." Elena looked at the timeline of her life on the wall. She looked at the medals she would never win again. "Prison seems too easy," she said darkly. "He sits in a cell. He reads books. He gets out in 2 years for good behavior. Meanwhile, I'm in this chair for 50 years. "What do you want?" Mark asked. "I'll do whatever you say. If you want me to burn his life down, I'll hand you the matches." Elena looked at Mark. She saw the loyalty in his eyes. A man she had met only 4 hours ago was willing to go to war for her. That realization shifted something in her heart. She wasn't alone anymore. "I want him to look me in the eye," Elena said slowly. "I don't want a lawyer speaking for him. I don't want a judge reading a sentence. I want him to look at me, look at this chair, and admit what he did. I want to see him break." "The confrontation," Mark nodded. "Psychological warfare. He invited us to a barbecue," Elena remembered suddenly. "Next Saturday. He mentioned it when he set up the date." "If you guys hit it off, come to the barbecue. Bring Elena." Mark's eyes narrowed. "He wants to see his experiment work. He wants to see us happy so he can feel absolved." "Exactly," Elena said, a cold smile forming on her lips. "So let's go. Let's go to his house. Let's eat his food. Let's drink his wine. And then, let's destroy him." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. Elena wasn't just a victim. She was a strategist. "Next Saturday is too far," Mark said. "If we wait, the anger will fade or turn into bitterness. We need to strike while the iron is hot. We do it tomorrow. He's hosting a brunch for his investors. He invited me last week. I declined. I'm going to undecline." "A public execution?" Elena asked. "No," Mark corrected. "We don't do it in front of the crowd. That makes him the victim of a scene. We isolate him. We separate the target from the herd, and then we drop the hammer." Elena reached out and took his hand. Her grip was iron. "Pick me up at 10 a.m., she said. "I have the perfect dress. It's red, the color of warning." Mark squeezed her hand. 10 a.m., get some sleep, Elena. Tomorrow we go hunting." Sunday morning broke with a deceptive brightness. The storm had passed, leaving the Seattle sky a washed-out, innocent blue. The air was crisp, smelling of wet pine and expensive coffee. Mark pulled the van up to the curb outside Jerry's estate. He killed the engine and looked at Elena. She looked formidable. She wore the red dress she had promised, a deep crimson shade that looked like spilled wine against her pale skin. Her hair was pulled back tight, revealing the sharp angles of her face. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a judge. "Ready?" Mark asked. "I've been ready for 3 years." Elena replied, her voice steady. Mark got out, opened the side door, and deployed the ramp. As Elena rolled down, the sound of the motor whirring was the only noise on the quiet street. Mark stepped in behind her, not touching the chair, simply walking in her wake like a bodyguard. They moved up the driveway. The brunch was in full swing on the patio. Waiters circulated with mimosas. Men in polo shirts laughed too loudly. Women in sundresses gossiped in hushed tones. It was a scene of perfect, insulated privilege. When they rounded the corner to the patio, the conversation lulled. The sight of Mark, imposing, scarred, dressed in dark tactical casual, and Elena striking in her red dress and wheelchair, created a visual vacuum. Jerry spotted them immediately. He was holding a glass of champagne, wearing a white sweater tied around his shoulders. He looked the picture of suburban success. A smile plastered onto his face. He rushed over, his arms spread wide. "You came," Jerry boomed, a little too enthusiastic. "And look at you two. Together. I knew it." "I told Linda. I have a feeling about these two." He reached out to pat Mark's shoulder, but Mark shifted slightly, letting Jerry's hand fall into empty air. Jerry blinked, confused but recovered quickly, turning his attention to Elena. "Elena, you look ravishing. Red is definitely your color. Did the date go well?" Elena looked up at him. She didn't smile. Her eyes were like lasers burning through his facade. "The date was illuminating, Jerry," she said. "We talked about a lot of things. The past, the rain, accidents." Jerry's smile faltered for a microsecond, a twitch at the corner of his eye. "Accidents? Heavy conversation for a first date." "Mark drove me here," Elena continued, ignoring his comment. "He has a very safe driving style. He stops for people. He doesn't leave things behind." The air around the trio grew cold, despite the sun. Jerry took a sip of his drink, his knuckles white around the stem of the glass. "Well, that's Mark, mister. Safety. Look, grab a drink, mingle. My investors are dying to meet the war hero. Actually," Mark spoke up, his voice low and rumbling, "I want to see the Tahoe, Jerry." Jerry froze. "The Tahoe? Why?" "I'm thinking of buying one," Mark lied smoothly. "You always said yours was the best in class. Show me the rig. I want to see how it handles the wear and tear." Jerry looked between Mark and Elena. He sensed something was wrong, but his ego and his need to please his war hero friend overrode his survival instinct. "Sure," Jerry said, his laugh nervous. "It's in the garage. Come on." A little private tour. He led them away from the party, away from the witnesses, toward the detached garage. He was walking into the lion's den, and he didn't even know he was the meat. Chapter 13. The trap closes. The garage door rumbled open, revealing the cavernous space. The black Tahoe sat there, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Jerry walked over to it, patting the hood. "Here she is. 2020 model. Custom suspension. It's a tank, Mark. Keeps you safe from everything." Mark closed the garage door behind them. He locked it. The sound of the lock clicking echoed loudly in the concrete space. Jerry turned around. "Mark? Why did you lock the door?" "Privacy," Mark said. He didn't move toward the car. He leaned against the door, crossing his arms. "Elena has a question about the car." Jerry looked at Elena. She had rolled her chair forward, positioning herself directly in front of the bumper. She was staring at the sticker. The broken trident. "It's a cool sticker, right?" Jerry said, his voice cracking. "Support the troops. You know me." "It has a crack in it," Elena said softly. "Just like my spine." Jerry dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the concrete, shards of crystal and splashing liquid exploding outward. "What did you say?" he whispered. "Tiger Mountain Road," Mark said. He pushed off the door and took a step forward. "November 14th, 3 years ago, 8:15 p.m. Rain. Visibility 0. Jerry's face turned gray. He backed up until his legs hit the bumper of the truck. I don't know what you're talking about. You hit her, Jerry, Mark said. It wasn't a question. You came around the curve too fast. You drifted wide. You hit her. You saw her go into the ditch. You stopped. You looked. And then you ran. No, Jerry stammered. No, that's crazy. Mark, you're crazy. I would never. I have the photos. Mark pulled his phone out. I was here last night, Jerry. I saw the mismatched paint. I saw the new mounting bracket. I saw the shard of plastic still stuck in the wheel well. And I heard you. I heard you apologizing to the car. Jerry looked at Mark, betrayal warring with terror in his eyes. You broke into my garage? You broke her back, Mark roared, the sound filling the garage like thunder. Jerry flinched as if struck. He looked at Elena, really looked at her. For the first time, he connected the woman in the chair with the shadow in the rain 3 years ago. I didn't see you, Jerry wept, sliding down the front of the grill until he was sitting on the floor. I swear to God, I didn't see you until the last second. It was dark. The road was slick. So it was you, Elena said. Her voice was ice. I panicked, Jerry sobbed. I had been drinking, just a couple of beers at a client dinner. If I stopped, I would have lost everything. My license, my job, my family. I panicked. I drove away, and I've lived in hell every single day since. You lived in a mansion, Elena corrected him. I lived in hell. I lived in hospitals. I lived in rehab centers learning how to pee through a tube. I tried to fix it, Jerry pleaded, looking up at her with wet, pathetic eyes. Why do you think I took your portfolio? Why do you think I made you so much money last year? Why do you think I introduced you to Mark? I thought, if I could give you a good life, if I could give you a good man, it would balance the scales. Mark stepped forward, grabbing Jerry by the collar and hauling him to his feet. She isn't a ledger entry, Jerry. You can't balance the scales on a human life. You used me. You used my trauma, my loneliness, to try and wash your own hands. Mark raised a fist. He wanted to hit him. He wanted to destroy him. It would be so easy. One strike. Mark, don't. Elena's voice cut through the red haze. Mark froze. He looked at Elena. He's not worth the bruise on your knuckles, she said. Drop him. Mark shoved Jerry back against the car. Jerry slumped, defeated, a weeping mess. Chapter 14. The choice. Elena rolled closer to Jerry. She looked down at him. You have two choices, Jerry, she said. Choice A. Mark opens that door. We walk out. We go to the police with the photos, the paint samples, and the recording I just made of your confession on my phone. Jerry looked at the phone resting on her lap, the red recording light blinking. He paled. Or, he whispered, choice B. Elena continued. You go inside right now. You tell your wife the truth. You say goodbye to your kids. And then you drive yourself to the precinct and you turn yourself in. You plead guilty. No lawyers. No deals. You take the full sentence. Jerry trembled. Elena, please. I have children. So did the parents of the woman you left in the mud. She snapped. Do it, or I will ruin you in the press before the cops even put the cuffs on. I will make sure the world knows you aren't just a criminal, but a coward who tried to buy his victim off. Jerry looked at the floor. He looked at his beautiful car, the instrument of his destruction. He looked at Mark, his friend, who now looked at him with nothing but contempt. I'll go, Jerry whispered. I'll turn myself in. Good, Mark said. We'll be following you. If you turn left toward the airport instead of right toward the station, I will find you. And next time, I won't be bringing a recording device. Jerry stood up. He looked small. The swagger was gone. He walked past them, toward the door to the house. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Mark. I really did think you two would be good together, he said softly. You were right, Mark said, but not for the reasons you thought. Jerry walked inside. 10 minutes later, the garage door opened. Jerry walked out, carrying a small bag. His eyes were red. He got into the Tahoe, backed out, and drove down the driveway. Mark and Elena watched him go. Mark exhaled, a long, deep breath. The tension left his shoulders. He looked at Elena. "Are you okay?" he asked. Elena looked at the empty driveway. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she was smiling. "I'm light," she said. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel light." Chapter 15. The Starting Line. 6 months later. The morning air at the University of Washington track was cold, but the sun was bright. Mark was sweating. He was on his 10th lap, his pace steady, his breathing rhythmic. He wasn't running away from anything anymore. He was running just to run. As he rounded the bend, a blur of motion whizzed past him in the inside lane. It was Elena. She was in a racing wheelchair now, a long, aerodynamic, 3-wheeled machine made of carbon fiber. She was bent low, her arms pumping like pistons, her gloves striking the push rims with a rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack. She was fast, incredibly fast. "On your left, slowpoke," she yelled as she lapped him. Mark grinned, picking up his pace to try and keep up, though he knew it was futile. She was an athlete again. Jerry was in prison. He had pleaded guilty and received a 5-year sentence. It was justice, or as close to it as the world allowed. But Mark and Elena didn't talk about Jerry much. He was the past. They finished the workout together, cooling down on the grassy infield. Mark handed Elena a water bottle. "You're getting faster," Mark noted, wiping his face with a towel. "Nationals are in 2 months," Elena said, her eyes shining with that fierce competitive fire. "I'm going for gold, and then maybe the Paralympics." She looked at Mark. The gratitude was gone, replaced by something deeper, warmer. Love. "You going to be there?" she asked. "I need a good pit crew." Mark sat down on the grass next to her wheel. He took her hand. The nightmares of the valley were fewer now. The silence in his apartment was gone, replaced by the sound of her laughter and the spinning of wheels. "I'm not going anywhere," Mark said. "I'm your operator. I've got your 6. Elena squeezed his hand. She looked out at the track, an endless loop of asphalt. It wasn't about where the road ended anymore. It was about who was running beside you. "Good," she said. "Now help me up. I'm starving and I know a great steak place, but this time I'm driving." Mark laughed. "Deal."